I'm June, a 27-year-old Chicago resident, and it all began with a favor: maintain my privacy, have a quiet job in a library, have tea before bed, and I detest needless drama. So when my former college friend Tara unexpectedly called me with an outrageous request, I blinked and answered, "No, but I didn't, June. I need you to act like my wife for this apartment interview." She laughed nervously and breathlessly. "They only rent to married couples, and once I informed them that I was married, they wanted to meet you." "Tara," I groaned, "you owe me because I haven't seen you in 3 years." She was the noisy one, the flirtatious one, the girl with a charm, and she always had a knack of tying people up. I was the quiet roommate with a bookshelf full of books and a habit of laughing so loudly that the entire room would gravitate toward her. Vanishing during parties, we were only pals, but occasionally I noticed her observing me in that manner. Against all rationality, I said, "I'll do it," half out of curiosity and half something else. Tara squealed over the phone this one time, "You're the greatest phony wife ever." The apartment had large windows, hardwood flooring, a charming balcony, and just enough space. It was located in the ideal area. I tried to act as though Tara and I belonged together by following her into the interview for plants. The landlord, a sharp-eyed, gray-haired woman, asked all the typical questions about how Tara clasped my hand after we had been married for a while and had discovered our shared interests. Her fingernails dug into my flesh like a code beneath the table. She said that I fell in love with her right away when we first met in college, and she corrected my grammar is still a problem for her. The landlord chuckled with pleasure, and I smiled awkwardly. Grammar, the flat was a cute place. So that should have been the end of it. However, Tara gave me a glance and said, "Come live with me for a short while until I can pay the rent." I'm not sure why I agreed. Perhaps I missed her. Perhaps feeling lonely. I moved in with a luggage, a toothbrush, and a set of... First, it was enjoyable, like playing house. And we cooked, but my nerves were all tied up in my chest. Spaghetti together. I arranged the bookcase, and she left post-it notes on the refrigerator. She replaced it by color after we had argued about it in alphabetical order, but in a manner that made us both chuckle. But after that, the bed arrived. For a little while, she remarked, "We only have one," but I paused. "Come on, June, we can take turns on the couch. It's sleeping." But it wasn't simply sleeping. It's a queen, and we're not 12. I lay motionless on my side of the bed the first night, listening to her breathing and smelling her shampoo. I could feel the warmth of her body just inches away, along with vanilla and something pleasant, shifted in her sleep, accidentally touching my hand, and my stomach turned over like a page in a book I hadn't read. And she didn't either. By the third night, we were discussing our things we wished we had said, people we dated in college, and old recollections. Tara giggled quietly at something. "You ever wonder what would have happened if we actually dated?" she asked. I didn't, and then became silent for a while. She didn't insist on an answer that evening, and I didn't provide one either, but the question persisted. It stuck to our bedroom's walls, drifted between us throughout breakfast, and reverberated into quiet while we washed our teeth. Sometimes I'd look at her side by side and see that she was already staring at me, wouldn't turn away, and neither would I. She began by shifting little things. She ceased going on dates, at least as far as I knew, and once when I was asking her to cook my favorite dishes, she did it without asking. She arrived home from work late, soaked from the rain, and waited with a hot cup of tea and a towel. Damn. Her smile made me wonder what we were becoming into. The distinction between the real and the fake was no longer obvious. We were lying in bed one night, perhaps 2 weeks in, and it seemed like we had started playing a part and then forgotten it was a game. She muttered, "I used to dream about this, I didn't move." "What?" I asked, facing the wall and the ceiling. But I could already feel my heart pounding from our intense bond. "I used to wonder what your skin felt like in the morning when I woke up next to you." Her voice was low, almost like a confession, intended just for the dark. I was at a loss for words as my mind fumbled for anything humorous or safe. "But I muttered, my heart just like Tara, not knowing where I was heading. "Yes, you are aware that this was not intended to occur." She remained silent for a while. However, I eventually rolled over to face her, and she looked into my eyes. For a brief moment, I felt compelled to bridge the distance between us, but I chose not to. I muttered goodnight because I was afraid of what it might signify and what I might lose. I turned away once more. When I woke up the following morning, she had already left, and her side of the bed was cold. Undisturbed, I spent the morning with tea, breakfast in the oven, and a message on the pillow. I spent the entire day at work, shelving books like a robot, while attempting to figure out what the hell I was doing. In the dark, about her eyes, lips, and words, I told myself it was just bewilderment, simply the intimacy and the deception we were experiencing. But when I entered our apartment that evening and discovered her grinning with a bowl of popcorn on her lap, a hoodie half off one shoulder, and a jumble of hair, as if nothing had changed, I understood that what I liked was clarity rather than ambiguity. I always had it, and it really terrified me. "Are you okay?" she said. "Have you been?" I tried to chuckle. "But lately, I've been strange. You're the one making late-night confessions." I didn't say I did the air. "But you didn't detest it," she said with a smile. "Tightened our relationship." She put down the dish, brushed her fingers across her jeans, and stood up. "I meant what I said, June. The fact that you are no longer acting stopped me cold. Yet we are not. This isn't real." "Is it?" She moved closer, saying, "Tell me it's not. Look me in the eye and say nothing." My mouth opened, but nothing came out, and I felt like this was true. All at once, she moved so near that I could feel her breath on my cheek, causing me to feel terror, need, longing, and fear. "I want this for real. I want you." My chest rose, and I don't want to play home anymore. I plummeted more quickly. Suddenly, every part of me was burning. "I'm not sure how to handle this." I've never heard her whisper, "But I want to try," she said, barely audible. "With you." After which she gave me a gentle kiss that seemed uncertain at first, like a query. And she gave me a deeper, fuller kiss when I didn't pull away. And I returned the kiss as if I had been waiting my entire life for it. When we eventually separated, she pressed her forehead against mine and said, "So real wife now?" Which made me laugh uncontrollably. Eyes remained closed. God help me, I think so. After that, we didn't speak much. Didn't have to. We simply cuddled up beneath the blanket, her fingertips moving lazily around my arm and hand, settling on her waist. Whatever this was, it was frightening and no longer a game. The following few days seemed like walking on a tightrope. But for me, it also felt like the first honest thing in a long time. We didn't call it or discuss what had happened, but between paradise and panic, everything had altered. She gave me a lingering, gentle glance, as though I were something precious that she could finally touch. Without thinking, my palm found mine, and I leaned hip to hip with her in the kitchen while feigning to be getting coffee. Mugs on the upper shelf, and I could sense it during calm times as well, such as when we were lying in bed with our fingers facing one another. It was nice too, as he brushed my cheek in a kind of quiet apology for all the time we missed. Good. So I began to distance myself. At first, it wasn't immediately apparent. Minor things, I talked less, ceased making physical contact, and stayed late at work. Tara was too intelligent not to ignore the deep material she saw. One evening, as we were folding laundry on the couch, she inquired, "You okay?" Shrugged. "Yeah." She was just exhausted. She didn't push, but she also didn't buy it. The situation worsened when I heard her talking on the phone with an unidentified person, but I did hear the words June. And I believe I made a mistake because I froze, my chest wrenched, and I realized I was hurting her. I had spent my time with her, but it wasn't about her, and I still didn't know how to stop. Playing it safe all her life, erecting barriers so high that nobody could get over them. And suddenly this woman was untidy, terrified by the truthful, lovely Tara, who had somehow become lost. She stood up quickly and remarked, "Is this how it's going to be now?" One evening after another quiet supper. "Why are you avoiding me like I did?" I blinked as her chair slapped the floor. "You refuse to talk to me and recoil when I touch you. What happened?" "I'm not sure how to do this," I said as I glanced at her dry throat. "I'm not like you," she said, her voice trembling. "What does that even mean?" "Like me, you go right in, feel everything, and don't give a damn if it burns." I've always held back. I've never experienced anything genuine like this, and I don't want to destroy it. But she didn't approach June. Her gaze softened, damaging it. "You're just avoiding it." I turned my head away. "Perhaps I am." "Then stop her," murmured softly. "I don't care. I just want you all. Stop running. Be afraid. Be messy. Of you." Even in the moments of fear, my lip quivered. You have no idea how difficult that is. Perhaps she didn't, but I understand what it's like to desire something yet be too scared to pursue it. I spent years doing just that, with you. And now that I'm not doing it, I wanted to let her know everything since college. I've thought about her every day. The only thing that terrified me was that no one had ever made me feel so seen, was because I didn't know how to handle losing it if it didn't work out, and it already felt like love. Instead, I just moved to her slowly, one step at a time, wrapping my arms around myself, as if I were worried the ground may disappear beneath me. I put my head on her shoulder and exhaled, not realizing that I had been holding that breath for weeks. I muttered. "I'm really trying." She hugged me until it hurt. That night, we slept curled up closer than ever, and she said, "That's all I need." For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was acting as my heartbeat thumped against my back like a promise, to feel like I belonged somewhere. Soft lines were painted on the window by the morning sunlight. I didn't move because I didn't want to disturb the tranquility of the bed on her skin. Tara was motionless in the unique kind of silence that only comes from being around someone who gives you a sense of security. I gazed at the ceiling while she slept with her arms slackly stretched around my waist and her breath warm against the back of my neck. Tried not to think about how quickly everything happened, how real it was getting, and how deeply I was sinking. Though another side is louder now, I still wanted to evaluate what we were doing and what it meant for where we were going. Eventually, she moved, stretching a little but holding on to me, saying, "You wanted to stay in this moment forever." Awakened, she muttered, her voice still heavy with sleep. "Yes, you're not running. Today, not today," I said with a small smile, and she kissed my shoulder. "Good, because I had plans." I was surprised by that. "What kind of plans?" I raised an eyebrow at her as we left the apartment and did something that didn't include walls or awkward silence. Miss Planner smiled and asked, "What exactly did you have in mind?" "Picnic." In my typical lesbian dream, it was just the two of us eating park sandwiches and grapes. I laughed so hard, and I answered, "Fine. But if a bee were to approach me, something inside of me would burst." "Deal, I'm heading home." The park was less crowded than anticipated, with only a few. Tara spread a checkered blanket beneath a shade tree with families and a few joggers, dragging an odd pair of. I observed her move confidently while sporting barefoot hair and munching on food from her tote bag. She looked like summer, chaos, and everything I'd never allowed myself to desire before, all while wearing her hair wrapped up in a loose bun. "Why didn't?" I questioned abruptly, scarcely raising my voice above a whisper. "You tell me back." She paused in the middle. "Back when college you used to sit uncomfortably close to me on the couch and laugh at my stupid jokes on the evenings we chatted until 2 in the morning. You stared at me like I was a conundrum you didn't want to solve." So she put down her sandwich after chewing it carefully. "I couldn't risk losing you if I said one incorrect word." That hit, she answered. "Hard you wouldn't have lost me." I was unaware of that at the time. I attempted to be what people expected of me when I dated males, but I'm still figuring myself out. I always felt different with you, like maybe I didn't have to act like I was embarrassed when I looked down at my hands, acting so convincingly that I was oblivious to my feelings. "Do you now?" she inquired, and I caught her eyes and said, "I think so." The afternoon went by with a casual chat and gentle. I braided a little of her hair, and she fed me strawberries. But we didn't. The way our fingers remained interlaced, and the way we stared already conveyed what was happening, at one another as if no one else existed. But reality always manages to slink back in. When we got back to Tara's supervisor left her a voicemail in her apartment, and she walked the space while listening. When she hung up, her expression changed from inquisitive to irritated to inscrutable. "What am I asking?" "They want," she remarked, perched on the edge of the couch. "It's a promotion. Better pay, more creative. In order to move me to Seattle, control." But I did complete it in Seattle, and I sat next to her breast. One, if I say yes. We sat in silence, and there was complete tranquility at the end of the month. All of the softness we had been creating felt suddenly brittle after leaving the park, might vanish with a single plane ticket. "Wanna go?" I finally asked. Her eyes searched me as she said, "I want to stay with you, but I've worked for this." I nodded while looking at the floor, not expecting it to arrive at the worst possible moment. It was painful to consider losing her, waking up without her beside me, and entering our kitchen by myself. But I got up slowly and said, "We'll figure it out." Since I couldn't ask her to stay if it meant giving up what she had earned. "I wasn't running this time," she murmured, watching me as if she wanted to believe it, even though I wasn't sure we could. However, I sensed that the ground was beginning to move beneath us once more. The days after that call felt heavier, as if we were both. Tara didn't bring it up again, but I tried to appear normal while something massive hung over us, waiting to fall. Could see it on her face from the way she would go quiet in the middle of sentences and stare out the window for too long. I attempted to act as though my mind were elsewhere and continued to make dinner, fold laundry, and laugh at her jokes. However, I couldn't deny it. Every time I felt borrowed by her, I would wake up and count the number of. I would catch myself remembering small details, like the way she danced while cleaning her teeth, on the mornings we might have left, or how, without realizing it, she hummed depressing melodies. I fell deeply in love with her. Now, the memory of her leaving felt like a ticking clock within my chest. One evening, I stood in the hallway as she was doing the dishes. Observing her, she appeared emotionally and physically exhausted. As if I went into the kitchen and put my arms around her from behind, because she was containing a storm. She hesitated. "Hey," she murmured, then slowly leaned back toward me in the soapy water. "Hey," said, "are you all right?" "I don't want to talk about work right now," she said after hesitating. We just breathed in silence as we stood there, and then she murmured, "I'm scared." "Okay, June." Her voice broke. I'll grow resentful of you if I stay. And if I leave, Will, I put my arms around her. And I lose you totally. You won't lose me. You won't. She turned to face me. But I can't lie. I don't want you to leave. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of love and terror. I've never experienced anything like this, and I don't want to spoil it. I wiped a wet lock of hair away from her face. Then, let's quit acting like we can solve this on their own. So let's just have a conversation about it. So we did that. We sat on the floor of our living room for hours at night, sharing a half-empty bottle of wine. She informed me about everything we had been keeping hidden, including how hard she had worked to get this promotion and how she hoped to be in charge of carrying out a significant task. I confided in her about my anxiety about beginning afresh or at last meeting someone, loosing them to the timetable of life. She wept. And I did too. We supported one another during the storm, and by night's end, one thing was certain. We didn't want it to end. Perhaps it doesn't have to be forever. Sanford, maybe I go see how it is? Maybe you visit, she added quietly. Maybe, I said, we figure it out one step at a time. She nodded. I'll try, Will, if that's what it takes to save this US. I glanced. She was giving a difficult decision, a love that wasn't accompanied by assurances of a future, and I stared at her for a long time. Despite the difficulties and blank spaces, it was still love. Yeah, I muttered. We made the most of our time together. Every meal felt celebratory, and every kiss was a little more intense. Every moment was sweeter and more significant. We spent weekend getaways to remote locations and took a ton of pictures of one another, our apartment, the silly things that used to make us giggle when we weren't together, and finally the final. When morning arrived, she had packed her luggage and the cab was waiting, so I assisted her in carrying them. Down, holding hands, both of us feigning not to cry. She pulled before she entered. She muttered against my lips, I'll call every day, and kissed me as if she couldn't let go. You better, I shook my head and said, don't forget me. She entered and gave me one more glance. I waited there until it vanished when the automobile pulled away. And then I went upstairs to the apartment that was. Suddenly, it was too quiet, too huge, and too empty. Yet I didn't feel alone for the first time in a long time. Because I loved her, transformed me. And I realized that something genuine had started, even if we were apart. I didn't want to be in the apartment during the first week without her, but it was worth the wait. The same, yet it no longer felt like ours. Her hair tie was off, and her laughter no longer reverberated through the corridor, the kitchen counter. I still prepared 2 meals, even though the bed felt too large, too cold, and too quiet. Meals out of habit, and discovered that I was checking my phone every few minutes, as though I was anticipating something. She called every night without fail, even when I had nothing else to wait for. She giggled as she described how the toilet made a strange noise on the first night she showed me her new flat on a shaky video. When I told the neighbor that I wasn't single, she remarked, eyes steady on, and made a gurgling noise. I told her through the screen that I had someone, and I grinned heartily, complete all at once. We spoke for 2 hours that evening and again the next day. Routine began to take shape. She texted me good morning before my shift, and I discovered a stupid snapshot of something at lunch while preparing dinner. She worked on her video conversation, holding the phone between her elbow and a box of pasta. We discussed everything: dreams, wasted opportunities, and fears, but behind it all, I saw a developing. One night, around a month in, she experienced a new form of intimacy, even from a distance. Do you ever regret not saying something sooner? I questioned, hesitating as I watched her fuzzy in college, image on the screen of my phone all the time. But perhaps it wouldn't have lasted if we had. Perhaps we would have to wait till we— Maybe you're correct, but I used to sit even though we were ready. She nodded slowly. I laughed quietly, since I felt the same thing when I was next to you on study evenings, and wanted to hold your hand so badly that it hurt. Come back to life. I used to picture kissing you whenever you wore that big blue hoodie, smiled and said, God, I knew I wore that for you. These calls became my lifeline, but it wasn't always easy to love from a distance. On some evenings, the signal would go out, and I would cry in anger. There were evenings when I preferred her hand to her words in my ear. And most importantly, I was afraid she might find someone else. One evening after I'd been there, she noticed that there was someone new there who was easier. You know I'm still yours, right? Just because I'm not there doesn't mean I'm not with you, she replied, being quieter than normal. But what if it becomes difficult? I said, my voice hardly steady. Is she already? I wrote her a genuine letter on paper that night, saying, but I'd rather fight for you than settle for someone else. Told her everything I was afraid to say on the phone, including how much I needed her and how much I loved her. If we could get through this, I wanted to start a genuine life instead of just sharing beds and borrowing time. 5 days after mailing it the following morning, she called sobbing, saying, you wrote I want. I added, you wrote that I meant it. And she sobbed, to grow old with you. Voice breaking, I love you so much. June. And Tara, it makes me feel wild. Following that, we began organizing minor events. Initially a visit in 2 months, a savings plan, and a shared calendar for movie nights over video. 2 weeks later, one day, she spoke softly, fearfully, and excitedly all at once. What if I made a plan to return home not today, not tomorrow, but soon? I said. You're home. And her smile came through the screen, and my heart thudded. Was everything? So let's figure something out. At that point, even if she wasn't yet, I no longer felt alone, even though I was miles away, because love didn't end with. Weeks went by, and the prospect of Tara returning home changed from. In our calls, she began to leave subtle clues about how the flat appeared, perhaps hinting at a slow but consistent plan. Would I be willing to clear out the closet once more if the neighbor's dog continued to bark at 3 in the morning? It wasn't officially, not yet, but I could sense it was occurring. So I began to hope fervently and found myself thinking about. When the phone ended, I pictured myself at the airport, running into her arms and holding her without letting go. On another leisurely Sunday, we had coffee in our mugs in the morning, and her warm chuckle filled the room. But since situations like this didn't generally endure for me, people went, things changed. And what if a part of me remained terrified? What if the enchantment we created through phone conversations and handwritten letters disappeared when she returned? I didn't share that worry with her when she first entered. Instead, I kept it buried under to-do lists and recipes and phony diversions. Then, one Thursday night, I arrived home from work exhausted and irritable to discover a parcel. I picked it up carefully at my door. It wasn't a holiday or my birthday. Her calligraphy on the label made my heart race. And inside was a warm sweater, faded blue, her college blue hoodie, the one I've always imagined. A message that said, "In case you miss me too much, but not for long, I'm coming home," was tucked into the sleeve. I sat on the floor in the hallway and sobbed, not in a depressing or lonely way, but rather one that felt. I wrapped up in the hoodie that night, feeling as though your heart was finally catching up to all it had been waiting for. We had a lengthy video call that weekend, and it seemed like a second skin, as if it may replace the void where she once was. She appeared worn out, and her eyes were swollen. "Are you okay?" I said, and I submitted my resignation. They attempted to give me a better title and more money, but I couldn't handle it. I'm barely holding it together, worth being apart from you. Something I couldn't identify made my breast swell. Love, relief, guilt, everything. Are you certain? I've never been more certain. So I just nodded and blinked to stop the tears from streaming down my face. "I'll be home in 3 weeks, she replied, grinning despite her lip quivering. "This time, it's permanent." The countdown began over, but this time it felt different. So I started getting ready and repainting the bedroom, putting her favorite goodies back in the cabinet, and fixing the walls she always detested. Every work felt like a step toward her, a step toward us. The night before, the leaking faucet she often moaned about. When she got there, I was unable to fall asleep, so I lay in bed in her hoodie and stared up at the ceiling, imagining what it would be like if I had her by my side once more. Would we resume where we left off? Would it be awkward? Would it be ideal? I had no notion, but I was certain that I wanted it more than anything. The following day, my heart was racing and I stood there with nothing but my trembling hands as people passed me holding flowers, signs, families, and tears, and a heart ready to explode. Then I noticed her hair and her purse slung over one shoulder. She dropped her suitcase, and everything else melted away as the flight's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me. Instead of waiting, I raced and met her halfway, arms flung around one another, tears spilling. Between sobbing, there was laughing. "You're here," I muttered against her hair. "I told you I'd come." And she drew back just enough to give me a glance. Home, and it didn't feel like a beginning or an end when I planted a kiss on her in the midst of that packed airport. The first night she returned, she earned something that had been waiting for us the entire time. Her bag was sitting by the door, half zipped, and we didn't even stop to unpack it. Instead, we headed directly to we couldn't stop caressing each other, not even in that bedroom, so it wasn't for anything dramatic or hurried, frenzied, desperate manner, but in the manner you try to persuade yourself that the other person is real. We rested with her breath against my neck, her hand in mine, my fingers in her hair, entangled in one another, completely clothed, whispering things we had before discussed in letters and phone conversations. But in some way, she whispered, "I missed your smell," and had to repeat it skin to skin. I nudged, "I missed your feet always being cold." Against my collarbone, still cold. She smiled, "I know," and I kissed her leg in a whisper. We sat up too late discussing her flight, and she said to her cheek, "You're freezing," the strange sandwich she had at the airport on her last day of work. But soon the small conversation died down, and we were just quiet. Only when you love someone does that type of silence, not the awkward silence, but the breathing each other in, kind where your souls are just sinking. Her body wrapped around mine, like we had been doing since we fell asleep. this forever when I first woke up in the morning. I merely gazed at her untidy hair, her cheekbones pressed against the pillow, and her lips were gentle. And I understood thus I was no longer afraid of her going or of mucking things up and refusing to accept love. We spent the next weeks establishing a new rhythm. She unloaded her belongings and laid her jackets next mine. We got into another argument about pointless topics we needed 3 different kinds of peanut butter, but even the mugs should go. Who neglected to get toilet paper? Even in exasperation, battles felt different now, softer and safer. That one rainy Saturday, while we were snuggled on the couch with tea and a blanket, she turned to me with that sly gleam that usually indicated she was going to sabotage my peaceful existence with some wild, "Let's get a plant," she suggested, and I blinked. A plant would be like a commitment, she remarked. I chuckled. Plant something we can't kill. Certainly not a cactus. Cactus. So that afternoon we went outside with umbrellas and everything. And we returned home with Tara scribbled it in Sharpie on the small ceramic pot, and we called it us. She claimed that putting it on the windowsill will allow it to withstand anything because it is difficult to kill, even under harsh circumstances. As her heart grew, I replied, just like us. We kissed and smiled against each other's mouth while the rain drummed softly on the glass. We hadn't discussed marriage yet. Need to understand that our relationship felt more significant than a label and more profound than a contract, because of the way we consistently showed up for each. One night while lying in bed, in the way we fought and forgave, in the way we shared quiet and made it feel like music. Bed, she murmured. Do you recall the day we were given this apartment? I chuckled. You mean? She laughed, and I recall remembering that day when I had to pretend to be your wife and lie through my teeth. This is not a good idea. I turned to face her and put my hand in hers. Believe that was the greatest error I've ever made. She moved forward, kissed me on the forehead, and muttered, that wasn't an error. It was fate posing as one. And the girl I once feigned suddenly, married for an apartment, turned into the love I never expected but always needed. And now we share a bed. Every night, bed no lies, no faking, simply 2 people who happened onto something genuine and never give up.